This is a true story. Hey everyone, my name is Robert. Before we dive in today, I need you to ask yourself something. Have you ever met someone who seemed completely wrong for another person and you wondered why they were even together? Well, today's case starts exactly like that, with a relationship that made everyone scratch their heads. But what began as an unlikely romance in Turkey ended with a discovery that shocked an entire country and left investigators with more questions than answers. Let's start at the beginning. Ekaterina Bulgova was born on May 13, 1989 in Leningrad, one of Russia's largest cities that would later become St. Petersburg. In 2009, when she was 20 years old, she went on a family vacation to Turkey Sun. Sand, relaxation. Sounds perfect, right? And that's where she met him. Walter Baumann, a German citizen, 13 years her senior. Now, Walter had an interesting background. He was fluent in Russian because he'd been born in Kazakhstan back when it was still part of the Soviet Union. After the USSR collapsed in 1991, his family, who had German roots, immigrated to Germany. Walter got his education there and landed a decent job that paid well. But his personal life? That was a different story entirely. Walter lived with his parents. He didn't take care of his appearance, dressed sloppily, and frankly, most people found him unappealing. He'd been searching for the perfect woman for years, mostly online, and almost exclusively among Russian women. He'd even traveled all the way to Russia once to meet someone he'd been chatting with for months. When they finally met face to face, she took one look at him and wanted nothing more to do with him. Harsh? Maybe, but apparently accurate. So when Walter showed up from that Turkish vacation with a young, beautiful woman on his arm, his friends were shocked Ekaterina could have had her pick of admirers. Why would she choose Walter? Love works in mysterious ways, I guess. Or does it? After the vacation ended and they returned to their respective countries, they kept the romance alive through social media and marathon phone calls. Walter told his friends about their hours-long conversations, about the poetry they wrote to each other. He'd occasionally fly to St. Petersburg to see her, dropping serious money on these trips. At the time, Ekaterina was in her second year of university, studying business administration. Walter seemed serious about building a future together, so he helped arrange her transfer to Hamburg University. In 2010, Ekaterina left Russia and moved to Germany, to the port city of Bremerhaven on the North Sea coast. Everyone who knew Ekaterina described her as smart, attractive, and cheerful. She stayed in close contact with her family back in Russia. In Germany, she continued her business studies, went running, practiced yoga, and sought out peaceful places. She seemed to be thriving. A few months after her move, the couple got married. Walter's friend Alexander, who used to work as a wedding photographer, described the ceremony as extraordinary. He said Ekaterina was the most beautiful and happiest bride he'd ever seen. The wedding took place at a lighthouse, and afterwards they rode off in a massive white horse-drawn carriage. Very few guests attended, and the celebration ended unusually early, long before dawn. Still, the wedding photos captured what looked like pure happiness. Walter appeared to be a supportive husband, and Ekaterina smiled as she gently embraced him. They looked like two people who'd finally found their perfect match, except the fairy tale was about to hit its first major obstacle. Instead of moving into their own place, the newlyweds moved into Walter's parents' home. And this is where things started to unravel. Walter's mother, Ludmila Baumann, was not an easy woman to live with. Actually, let me rephrase that. She was a force of nature, and not necessarily in a good way. Since she's going to play an absolutely critical role in how this story ends, you need to understand who she was. Ludmila spent the first 38 years of her life in Kazakhstan. She was an exceptional student who became an assistant chemist-technologist, then a chemical engineer, and eventually a middle school teacher. She married at 18 and had one son, just one, her only child, and maybe that's why Walter became the single most important person in her entire world. When the Baumann family emigrated to Germany, Bremerhaven became their new home. Ludmila landed a position at a marine institute where she researched global warming. She held a respected position, frequently went out to sea and participated in roughly 25 expeditions, including trips to the Arctic. Her success story as an immigrant was so exemplary that her portrait, a full meter tall, hangs on the facade of Bremerhaven's Emigration Center alongside 30 other successful emigrants. Impressive credentials, right? But here's the thing. Ludmila couldn't accept that her son was no longer a little boy. He was a grown man in his 30s, but she treated him like a child. When he wasn't home, she'd call him every single hour. "Where are you? When are you coming back? Who are you with?" She had zero boundaries, zero healthy distance. And when Ekaterina entered the picture, Ludmila made her life miserable. Ekaterina tried everything to win her mother-in-law's approval. Nothing worked. Ludmila constantly interfered in her son's marriage and criticized Ekaterina relentlessly. She accused her of being a terrible housewife. When Ekaterina dressed nicely to go out, Ludmila would accuse her of dressing like a prostitute. When she dressed down to avoid criticism, Ludmila would mock her for looking like a gray mouse. The woman couldn't win. Meanwhile, Walter worked at the port, earning around 4,000 euros a month. He worked constantly, including weekends and holidays, because overtime paid more. Was he a workaholic? No, he was greedy. He hoarded most of his earnings and hated spending money. In 2017, Ekaterina got pregnant. Walter finally decided to spend some of his precious savings on a house so they could move out of his parents' place. But even the house hunt dragged on forever because Walter was determined to spend as little as possible. Ekaterina hoped the move would improve their relationship. It didn't. Ludmila became a constant visitor, continuing to interfere in every aspect of her son's life. When Ekaterina gave birth to their daughter, the tension between husband and wife intensified even further, and that's when Walter's behavior took a dark turn. After their daughter was born, Walter became increasingly strict and controlling. He talked down to Ekaterina, forbade her from learning to drive, and prohibited her from speaking German with their daughter. He wanted the child to know only Russian. Why? Control. Pure and simple. Ekaterina couldn't understand what had changed in her husband. He became more resentful, more jealous, more controlling. His mood swings became unpredictable. He could explode over the smallest, most insignificant things. And then the relationship crossed a line that should never be crossed. Walter started using his physical strength against his wife. In late 2019, authorities got their first glimpse into the Baumann household when they received a domestic violence report, but the case was quickly closed after the couple told social workers they'd reconciled. Behind closed doors, though, nothing had changed. They continued fighting, screaming at each other, sometimes right in front of their baby daughter. Walter's paranoia grew. He secretly photographed and videotaped Ekaterina. He recorded their arguments. He even asked a computer technician he knew to hack his wife's phone. Thankfully, the guy refused. Walter accused Ekaterina of being a bad mother and mentally unstable. Ekaterina, for her part, accused Walter of losing interest in her, of working obsessively, of being completely burned out. She couldn't handle the constant stress and fear anymore. In the fall of 2020, Ekaterina reached out to a support center for victims of domestic violence for the first time. She left with their daughter. Walter immediately went into damage control mode. He promised he'd change. He said he realized he'd been wrong. He told her he couldn't live without her and their daughter. And Ekaterina, probably hoping for the best, forgave him and returned home. The fighting didn't stop. Walter would realize he'd gone too far, then try to smooth things over with gifts or family trips. It became a cycle. But his behavior toward their daughter was evolving in an equally disturbing direction. Walter's attitude toward his child can only be described as total control. When he was home, he demanded that his daughter always be within his sight. If they went anywhere, he wouldn't let her out of his arms, even though she was 3 years old and perfectly capable of walking. He cut his port hours in half just so he could spend more time with her. He'd take her to kindergarten, pick her up, cook for her. At night, she slept in the parents' bedroom. People who knew Walter well said he was a strategist, someone prone to dramatic displays, skilled at manipulating others. Money was one of his primary motivations in life. He often seemed nervous and impatient. After Ekaterina became a mother and started visiting her family in Russia, Walter always accompanied her. Always. He was terrified she'd return to Russia and take his daughter away from him. As Walter's abuse escalated, Ekaterina began seriously considering divorce. Then she discovered something alarming. All her documents had disappeared. Her passport, her identification, everything. Later, it would come out that Walter had taken all his wife's papers to his mother's house for safekeeping. During one visit from Walter's mother, another explosive argument erupted, and Ekaterina was literally thrown out of the house, tossed out like garbage. She went to the police, and they intervened to resolve the situation temporarily. Then came an incident so severe that even the kindergarten staff couldn't ignore it. Ekaterina and Walter had such a heated fight right outside their daughter's kindergarten that the administration contacted Youth Support Services. The quarreling couple was assigned a family crisis counselor who would monitor them and their child's well-being for 6 weeks. The counselor's assessment? It is too dangerous for the child to be left with her parents. Think about that for a moment. Too dangerous. But Ekaterina felt trapped. The only reason she stayed with Walter was for their daughter, but she couldn't take the child back to Russia under German law. For their daughter to leave the country, Ekaterina needed Walter's written consent, and Walter would never agree to that, never. In August 2021, things reached a breaking point. Ekaterina took their daughter and went to a women's crisis center for the second time. This time, she told the staff something chilling. Her husband wanted to take her life. Not, "I'm afraid he might hurt me." She said he wanted to kill her. Social services evaluated the situation and wanted to place their 5-year-old daughter in an orphanage. The psychologist from the Youth Affairs Department described the family dynamic as very severe. Ekaterina agreed to let her daughter go into foster care if it meant keeping her safe, but Walter and his mother Ludmila fought against it. So they reached a compromise that sounds absolutely absurd. The parents would split custody, a few days with dad, a few days with mom at the women's shelter, constantly alternating. The only requirement? The daughter had to attend kindergarten to learn German within a few weeks. The family reunited once again. Some sources say the women's shelter had problematic roommates, and the required kindergarten was too far away. Whatever the reason, Ekaterina returned home. But things were different now. They'd started divorce proceedings and were living in separate rooms like hostile strangers under the same roof. Ekaterina's longing to return to Russia grew stronger every day. Walter said he was fine with that, but only under one condition. Their daughter would stay with him in Germany. So at the end of 2021, going into 2022, Ekaterina traveled to St. Petersburg alone. While there, she went on a date with a man she'd met online, a pilot from the Siberian city of Omsk. She returned to Germany in mid-January 2022, and she and this pilot continued chatting daily, exchanging romantic messages. Then, on February 4th, 2022, the 32-year-old woman stopped responding to everyone. Her family, her new love interest, everyone. 2 days later, on February 6th, when Ekaterina's parents couldn't reach her, they contacted German police and requested a welfare check. That's when Walter told them his story. According to him, Ekaterina had run away again. She'd taken an empty suitcase and 13,000 euros from his savings. She'd left behind her phone, her keys, her clothes, and most importantly, her 5-year-old daughter. Ekaterina's mother, Svetlana, told journalists, "We found out about her disappearance in a strange way. I couldn't reach her for several days. I couldn't reach Walter either. Then he finally answered and said he hadn't seen her since February 5th. He claimed she wasn't responding because she had no money on her phone." Does that make sense to you? A mother leaves everything behind, including her child, taking only an empty suitcase and cash? The entire city of Bremerhaven mobilized to search for Ekaterina. Volunteers combed through every corner, posted flyers everywhere, explored every possible theory about what might have happened. But there was one person who showed absolutely no concern about Ekaterina's disappearance. Can you guess who? While worried citizens plastered the city with missing person flyers, Walter was busy renovating his house. Police officers immediately got a bad feeling about this case. They suspected the worst from the moment they learned about the missing woman, and Walter became their primary focus. 4 days after Ekaterina allegedly ran away, police searched the Bauman house for the first time. By then, Walter had finished his renovations. He'd painted the floors in the guest room and replaced a couch. Neighbors reported seeing him buy large quantities of cleaning supplies at the local store. When police arrived, they discovered that footage from the home security cameras had mysteriously vanished. Officers spent 3 hours searching for evidence. They brought a cadaver dog through the garage and the house. In the garage, the dog showed some agitation, but didn't give a definitive alert. Initial forensic tests didn't reveal anything incriminating in either the house or the garage. In Walter's cluttered car, they found a knife and an electric shocker, which they seized as potential evidence. What struck the officers most was Walter's complete lack of concern for his missing wife. Instead, he kept asking whether he'd get sole custody of his 5-year-old daughter if his wife didn't return days past. The search continued. Nothing turned up. It was like Ekaterina had evaporated into thin air. But investigators knew the statistics. What are the chances that a young mother would abandon her daughter, her documents, and her phone in a foreign country, especially taking an empty suitcase with her? The story didn't add up, and Walter's behavior only deepened their suspicions. The mysterious disappearance captured attention far beyond Bremerhaven. 2 weeks after Ekaterina vanished, roughly 400 volunteers from across northern Germany descended on Bremerhaven with rescue dogs, searching repeatedly. Then came March 1st, 2022. 25 days after Ekaterina disappeared, devastating news broke, first in Bremerhaven, then throughout Germany, and finally in Russia. Someone out for a walk along the Weser River spotted something odd that had washed ashore. A suitcase. When they opened it, they discovered something horrifying. Fragments of a woman's body, packed in garbage bags, and not all the fragments were there. Some were missing. The victim was identified as 32-year-old Ekaterina Bauman. In a twist that feels almost cruel, the suitcase was found near the lighthouse where she'd gotten married all those years ago. According to experts, it was pure luck that the suitcase washed ashore at all. It could easily have drifted out to the North Sea, and if that had happened, Ekaterina would have remained missing forever. Hope for any kind of happy ending crumbled in that moment. Now her family could only grieve. Local residents created an improvised memorial where they left flowers, lit candles, and wrote letters. Walter Bauman was arrested as the primary and only suspect. After the body was discovered, police searched the house again. This time, forensic experts worked for several days. They found a bottle containing a strong sedative, the same sedative that showed up in Ekaterina's blood work. They found disposable gloves, foil, adhesive tape, massive quantities of garbage bags and cleaning products. In the garage and shed, they discovered canisters of acetic acid, solvents, bleach, keys to a suitcase, and a pink scarf that Ekaterina wore in her last selfie. Investigators noticed something else. There were almost no personal items belonging to Ekaterina in the house. Most of her clothes had been thrown away. The couple's wedding photo, once a reminder of happier times, was hidden behind the piano. Police also found the white jacket Ekaterina wore in her final selfie. Where was it? In a trash container at Ludmila Bauman's workplace, Walter's mother's workplace. While in custody, Walter wrote frequent letters to his mother, telling her he loved her and calling her "my son." The letters contained desperate pleas. "Help us all, Mother. Save us. You can do it. You are my only hope for the future. Please, save me." What did he mean by all this? That wouldn't become clear for another 8 months. Let me walk you through what investigators believe happened on Friday, February 4th, 2022, the last day of Ekaterina's life. At 4:30 in the afternoon, she went for a 10-minute walk wearing a light-colored jacket and yellow skirt. Neighbors' security cameras captured this. That evening, the family had dinner: tuna, halibut, mashed potatoes, olives, and a bottle of wine. According to Walter, Ekaterina drank 1 glass and he drank the rest. That's why, he claimed, he went to bed at 8 p.m. Court documents show that Ekaterina's phone connected to the network for the last time at 7:41 p.m. At 8:25 p.m., she made a video call to her new boyfriend, the pilot, from her computer. She was in good spirits and told him she'd call back after putting their daughter to bed. But she never called that evening. She never called anyone again. 2 hours later, the pilot sent her a goodnight message. It was never read. Forensic examination revealed that Ekaterina died approximately 2 hours after dinner. The analysis of her stomach contents confirmed this timeline. Experts found traces of strong sedatives and alcohol in her blood. Her hyoid bone was broken. Cause of death? Strangulation. Everything that happened to her body afterwards, according to forensic experts, was done with very sharp tools. The next morning, Walter briefly opened his car at 7:22 a.m. At 10:20 a.m., the car left and returned at 4:49 p.m. 3 days later, Walter called his wife's phone, probably to support his story that she'd run away. He also sent her several text messages asking the obvious question, "Where are you, Ekaterina?" Here's an interesting detail. Before Ekaterina's disappearance, Walter and his mother communicated intensely via WhatsApp every single day. But after February 4th, there was complete silence between them. Totally out of character. In mid-February, Walter took his car to an auto service shop and told an employee the interior needed to be cleaned very thoroughly, from top to bottom. The trial began on August 26, 2022. Prosecutors argued that Walter slipped sedatives into his wife's drink, then strangled her once she fell asleep. They presented evidence showing he'd prepared in advance for what he planned to do with her body. The motive: fear of losing custody of his daughter in a divorce, combined with the financial losses a divorce would bring. Blood evidence proved crucial. Despite Walter's attempts to clean everything according to internet instructions, traces of blood were found in the garage, under shelves, on the floor, on the stairs, in the seams. Blood traces were also found on the carpet in his car trunk despite thorough cleaning. The Institute of Forensic Medicine confirmed it was all Ekaterina's blood. Then came the real bombshell. Police had seized Walter's phone and computer, and what they found answered a lot of questions. Shortly before the tragedy, he'd made these searches: how to avoid punishment for taking a person's life, which acid dissolves meat, how many liters of acid are needed to fill a bathtub, how to read other people's WhatsApp chats, how long does it take to die from sedatives, can you be convicted without evidence in Germany? Between December 2021 and the end of February 2022, he made approximately 500 searches related to the crime. Everything pointed to meticulous planning. On the day of his wife's disappearance, he Googled electric shocker twice. Forensic experts found evidence of electrocution on Ekaterina's body. Investigators believe Walter used the shocker to check if his wife was still alive. Throughout the trial, Walter wore his wedding ring and referred to himself as a widower. For 2 full months, he remained silent, offering no comments on the charges. Sometimes, when witnesses testified, he'd plug his ears, as if none of this had anything to do with him. The only time he showed real emotion was when his mother appeared in the courtroom. He cried when she was called as a witness. He stared at her with his hands folded like he was praying. "Get me out of here," he'd begged her in a letter. And apparently, Ludmila decided to help her son. During her testimony, Ludmila Baumann made a stunning claim. She was the one who took Ekaterina's life. "It was me, not my son," she declared. Here's what Ludmila told the astonished courtroom. She came to her son's house in the middle of the night because Walter had called asking her to watch their granddaughter. When she arrived, she found Ekaterina asleep on the couch. According to Ludmila, she tried to wake her by shaking her. Ekaterina woke up and hit her in the face. A fight broke out, during which Ludmila claimed she strangled her daughter-in-law. She also claimed responsibility for everything that happened to the body afterwards. But did Ludmila actually commit this crime? Or was her love for her son so overwhelming that she was willing to take the blame for him? Remember, mother and son were extraordinarily close, constantly in communication. Their WhatsApp conversations alone filled 1,699 pages of investigation files. Despite confessing to murder, Ludmila walked out of the courtroom as a free citizen that day, and every other day of the trial, the jury and prosecutors didn't believe her. They assumed she was simply trying to protect her son. Even seasoned attorneys were shocked by the mother's confession. Ludmila's own lawyer demanded her arrest, while Walter's defense team demanded his release. Neither happened. The mother remained free. The son stayed in jail. But Ludmila wasn't finished. She wrote another letter to the court, this time describing in detail what she'd done with the body. Once again, she insisted, "My son did not do this." She requested to be questioned again and formally charged. The court denied her request and maintained their disbelief. Then Ludmila did something that proved she'd at least been involved in the crime. Remember how not all of Ekaterina's remains were found in that suitcase? Ludmila told investigators exactly where to find the missing parts that hadn't fit in the suitcase. The information she provided was accurate. Police discovered another bag, weighted down to prevent it from floating, in the exact location Ludmila specified. Data from the pedometer on Ludmila's phone showed that on the night of the murder, at approximately 12:40 a.m., she walked 220 yards. Security cameras near Walter and Ekaterina's house captured someone walking past at that time. Walter's father's phone also showed activity during those hours he'd driven Ludmila to their son's house, although he told investigators he'd been asleep. Forensic experts established that by that time, Ekaterina was already dead, which means the 66-year-old woman had been lying. Let me break this down for you. Ludmila arrived at her son's house after Ekaterina was already dead. She was present during whatever happened next with the body. Even if she didn't actively participate, she helped clean the house. She assisted her son in covering up evidence of the crime. She was, at minimum, an accomplice after the fact. But under German law, apparently, things work differently. Ludmila was never arrested. She was never charged with anything. Does that seem right to you? What do you think about that? As the verdict date approached, Ludmila's desperation to save her son intensified. She wrote yet another letter to the judge, again claiming she'd committed the crime, not Walter. But this version of events was different. This time she wrote, "I hated Ekaterina, but couldn't tell my son. He was fighting for his wife's love, and I was afraid she would harm him. So I decided to eliminate Ekaterina by making it look like she'd poisoned herself over her tragic love for that Russian pilot." According to this new story, Ludmila had mixed drugs into juice and given it to Walter without telling him what it contained, instructing him to serve it to his wife during dinner. She said she came to their house to plant the fake farewell note, but Ekaterina woke up, forcing Ludmila to strangle her. But the court didn't buy this confession either. All the evidence pointed to one person, her son. Walter remained silent throughout almost the entire trial. Then, during one of the final hearings, he read aloud from notes spanning 230 pages. He talked about his childhood in Kazakhstan, his life, his love. The central theme of his statement was, "I always loved Ekaterina and our daughter, but her emotional problems and burnout led to constant fighting." 230 pages, yet he barely addressed the night that destroyed everything. In his version of events, he was asleep when his mother took his wife's life and dragged her body into the garage. Walter blamed his mother for this horrific crime. He told the court, "She betrayed me, used me, and threw me into prison." Then he appealed directly to the judge. "My daughter lost her mother. She cannot lose her father, too." On May 23, 2023, when the verdict was announced, Ekaterina's daughter had just turned 6 years old. Walter Baumann received a life sentence under German law. He'll be eligible for parole after 15 years. Think about that. In 15 years, that little girl will be 21 years old. Her father might walk free while she's still trying to process the trauma of what he did. Ekaterina's ashes were laid to rest in an urn in her hometown of St. Petersburg, far from the lighthouse where she once married with such hope, far from the city where her fairy tale turned into a horror story. What does this case teach us? Maybe that love can become possession, that control can escalate into violence, that some people will do absolutely anything, including taking a life, rather than lose what they believe belongs to them. Walter couldn't stand the thought of Ekaterina leaving and taking their daughter. He couldn't bear the financial hit of a divorce. So he planned, methodically and carefully, to make her disappear. And his mother? Whether she committed the actual murder or merely helped cover it up afterwards, she chose her son over justice. She chose him over the young woman she claimed to love as a daughter. She chose him over her granddaughter's well-being. That's the kind of toxic love that destroys everything it touches. So the next time someone tells you about love at first sight, about whirlwind romances and fairy tale weddings, remember Ekaterina. Remember that the lighthouse where she got married is the same place her body washed ashore. Remember that sometimes the person who promises to love and protect you is the one you should fear most. And remember that behind closed doors, away from the horse-drawn carriages and wedding photos, relationships can become prisons, and love can become something deadly.